It is 5,000 years before the modern world. No cities, no empires, just fire, smoke, and the endless weight of the sky. Somewhere in the frozen expanse of Siberia, a tired forager makes a mistake that will echo across all of human history. They toss a handful of strange leaves onto the campfire. The flames hiss, the smoke rises, and suddenly the world tilts sideways. Their shoulders drop, their mind drifts. They forget the hunger. They forget the cold. They forget why they were ever afraid. That night a plant became something more than food, more than fiber, more than fuel. It became an escape, a medicine, a doorway, and humanity has never been the same. So what was that plant, and how did it travel from a Siberian campfire to the temples of India, the palaces of Persia, and the hidden gardens of medieval Europe? And why, after thousands of years, are we still lighting it, burning it, and arguing about it? Tonight we follow the green thread that weaves through every empire, every religion, and every rebellion. From golden bongs buried with ancient warriors to sacred smoothies drunk in the name of gods. From the world's first medical text to the birth of a word you use every single day. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's find out when humanity first decided to smoke the plant that would never let us go. If this kind of history makes you curious, please consider subscribing, but only if you genuinely want to stay for the full story. And drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from tonight. Now, let us begin. It is 5,000 years before the modern world. No cities, no empires, just fire, smoke, and the endless weight of the sky. Somewhere in the frozen expanse of Siberia, a tired forager makes a mistake that will echo across all of human history. They toss a handful of strange leaves onto the campfire. The flames hiss, the smoke rises, and suddenly the world tilts sideways. Their shoulders drop, their mind drifts. They forget the hunger. They forget the cold. They forget why they were ever afraid. That night a plant became something more than food, more than fiber, more than fuel. It became an escape, a medicine, a doorway, and humanity has never been the same. Now, imagine being that forager. You have no language for what is happening to you, no history of this sensation, no wise elder to explain why the fire seems to be speaking in colors. You are utterly alone with a new feeling that stretches your senses like warm taffy. The bones in your hands feel like they belong to someone else. The stars above you pulse with a rhythm that almost makes sense. And in that moment you understand something profound. The world is not what you thought it was. There's a veil between you and everything else, and for the first time, that veil has thinned enough for you to peek through. You do not know it yet, but you have just discovered the oldest human trick for surviving the unbearable weight of ordinary life. You have found a way to step outside yourself. This is where the story of cannabis truly begins. Not in a temple, not in a palace, but in the trembling hands of someone who had no idea what they were holding. They could not have known that this plant would one day be worshipped as a gift from the gods. They could not have imagined that its fibers would hold together the sails of empires. They could not have guessed that its smoke would be debated by kings, condemned by popes, and secretly enjoyed by poets who wrote odes to its mysteries. All they knew was that when the smoke cleared, they felt lighter. And in a world where every day was a fight for survival, lighter felt like salvation. Archaeologists would later find the proof of this moment. Cannabis seeds buried with the dead, as if the plant was too precious to leave behind in the world of the living. Someone in that ancient time decided that this green companion should follow them into the next life. That is not the behavior of a people who simply used a plant for rope. That is the behavior of people who had felt something sacred, something they could not explain, but could not bear to lose. The forager who first inhaled that smoke did not know they were starting a love affair that would outlast every empire. But they must have felt it in their bones. The world had just become a more interesting place, and they would never be the same. And yet this was only the first step on a journey that would take the plant across deserts and oceans and into the hands of emperors and mystics. From that campfire in Siberia, the secret began to spread like a quiet whisper. One tribe told another. One healer shared a remedy with a traveler. One bored farmer experimented with a new way to pass the time. And slowly cannabis moved out of the shadows of prehistory and into the light of civilization. By the time the first Chinese emperor tasted its power, it was no longer a forgotten weed. It was a cure for pain, a balm for the soul, and a key to a hidden door. But that is a story for the next chapter. For now, let us linger with that lonely forager under the stars. They had no idea what they had found, but they knew one thing for certain. They would find it again, and they would never let it go. And so the secret traveled east, not as a conqueror, not as a king, but as a quiet whisper carried by traders and wanderers who had felt that strange lightness in their bones. By the time it reached the yellow soil of ancient China, the plant had already shed its Siberian anonymity. Here it found a civilization that was busy inventing everything: paper, silk, gunpowder, and the world's first bureaucracy. But it also found a man who would give it a new kind of power. A man named Shen Nung, the divine farmer. Now Shen Nung was not your typical emperor. He did not spend his days conquering neighbors or building monuments to his own ego. He spent his days wandering through forests, tasting every leaf berry and root he could find. He was the world's first human drug trial with no control group, no consent form, and no backup plan. Legend says he would chew a new plant weight to see what happened, and then write down the results with a calm that borders on terrifying. It was a dangerous game. He was poisoned 70 times in his lifetime. But each time he found an antidote, because he was also the world's first pharmacist. And then one day, he found cannabis. He did not smoke it. That would come later. He brewed it into a tonic, a warm, bitter drink that eased pain and quieted the mind. His book, The Pen Tsao Ching, reads like an ancient Yelp review for the natural world. Good for rheumatism, good for gout, good for forgetfulness. And there is the beautiful contradiction. The plant that causes forgetfulness is used to treat it. Shen Nung had stumbled into a paradox that would follow cannabis for the next 5,000 years. It helps. It harms. It heals. It intoxicates. It is medicine. It is sin. It is both at once. And the divine farmer could not have known that a simple tonic would one day be called a vice by some and a sacrament by others. But here is the thing about ancient China. They did not pretend cannabis was just for the sick. They knew it made you feel good. They knew it relaxed the body and loosened the tongue. They knew it made the long hours of labor and the endless paperwork of empire just a little more bearable. And so they used it, quietly, respectfully, without the moral panic that would come much later. To them, cannabis was not a rebellion. It was a release, a small mercy in a world of famines, floods, and invading armies. It was the plant that helped you forget the tax collector for a few hours. And that was precious. The Chinese also discovered something else about this green companion. It was useful. The fibers made ropes that could hold a ship together in a storm. The seeds could be pressed into oil for cooking in lamps. The stalks could be woven into cloth that lasted longer than wool and was cooler than leather. Entire villages were built from cannabis. You could wear it, eat it, read it, and if you were lucky, you could drink it and forget why you ever needed it. The plant was everywhere. In the fields, in the homes, in the temples. It was the Swiss Army knife of the ancient world. Except instead of opening bottles, it opened minds. Occasionally too far. But even in this land of quiet acceptance, there were whispers of caution. The Confucians, the upright scholars of the day, frowned upon anything that loosened the grip of reason. They said cannabis expanded laziness. They said it led to idle dreams and wasted days. The Taoists disagreed. They said the plant opened the gates of perception. They said it helped you merge with the universe. It was the first recorded drug policy debate in history. And it ended the same way all such debates end. Everyone pretending to agree while doing whatever they wanted behind closed doors. And so the plant continued its quiet work, healing, relaxing, and slowly preparing the world for what was coming next. For the Chinese, cannabis was a companion. But across the grasslands, a different people had a different idea. They would not brew it. They would not grind it. They would burn it. And they would howl. And while China was quietly brewing its tonics and perfecting its paperwork, a different kind of people were taking cannabis in a direction that would have made the Confucians choke on their tea. Out on the endless grasslands of Central Asia, the Scythians had no use for bureaucracy or balance. They had horses, they had swords, and they had a collective attitude that can only be described as armed and unbothered. These were the warriors who taught the world that a good death was better than a dull life. And when they discovered cannabis, they treated it the way they treated everything else, with total commitment. The Scythians did not sip their medicine. They did not grind it into gentle powders for aching joints. They took the plant, they threw it on a blazing hot stones, and they crawled into sealed tents until the smoke was thick enough to taste. And then, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, they howled with pleasure. Not giggled, not chuckled. They howled, like wolves calling to a moon that only they could see. Imagine the scene for a moment. A tent of stitched hides, low to the ground, trembling with heat. Inside, a dozen warriors, their bodies covered in tattoos that told stories of battles and gods, their eyes glinting in the firelight. The stones hiss as the seeds hit them, and the air turns silver with smoke. They breathe it in like it is the last air they will ever need. And for a few precious moments, they're no longer warriors. They're not Scythians. They're not even human. They're something else, something that has slipped the leash of ordinary life. This was not recreation. This was ritual. The Scythians believed the smoke carried them to the spirits of their ancestors, to the gods of the steppe, to the place where the dead whispered secrets and the living found courage. They did it before battles, after funerals, and during celebrations that lasted for days. It was their way of stepping outside the brutal cold of their existence and touching something warmer, something more mysterious. For people who lived on horseback and slept under the stars, cannabis was the only roof they needed. It was the fire that burned inside them when the outside world was frozen and hostile. And here's the part that still makes historians smile. Archaeologists later dug up their tombs, the grand burial mounds that dotted the steppe, and they found something extraordinary. Golden bongs, literal golden pipes, heavy with craftsmanship, and still carrying the residue of cannabis from 3,000 years ago. The Scythians did not just use the plant. They worshipped it. They buried their greatest warriors with their favorite pipes, as if the afterlife would be unbearable without a good smoke. You cannot buy that kind of historical commitment. These were people who faced death with the same ferocity they faced life, and they wanted their cannabis to follow them into the unknown. The Scythians also understood something that the Chinese had barely glimpsed. Cannabis was not just medicine or ritual. It was power. The power to endure the endless winters. The power to forget the faces of the enemies you had killed. The power to sit quietly in a world that never stopped demanding more. For them, the plant was not a secret. It was a gift from the gods to help them survive the crushing weight of existence. And they used it without apology, without guilt, and without the moral hand-wringing that would eventually infect the rest of the world. They burned it. They breathed it. They became something greater than themselves. And then they passed the torch to the next civilization. Because the plant was not done traveling yet. It was about to cross the mountains into a land where it would become not just sacred, but divine. And so the green flame passed from the Scythian tents to the mountain passes of the Himalayas, carried by traders who knew that some things were too valuable to keep secret. When it arrived in the ancient land of India, cannabis did not just find a new home. It found a new soul. Here the plant was not medicine. It was not a warrior's ally. It was a god. Specifically, it was the gift of Shiva, the destroyer, the transformer, the lord of the cosmic dance. And the way the Indians honored it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Now Shiva was not a gentle god. He was the wild one, the outsider, the ascetic who smeared his body with ash and drank poison to save the universe. He was dangerous and unpredictable and utterly magnificent. And according to the ancient texts, he discovered cannabis while meditating beneath a celestial tree. He was tired. He was hungry. He was wrestling with the weight of creation. And then he found the plant. He crushed its leaves. He mixed them with milk and spices. He drank, and suddenly the cosmos made sense. He saw the threads that held the universe together. He heard the music of the spheres. He realized that the endless cycle of birth and death was not a tragedy, but a dance. and he emerged from that moment as the Lord of Bhang. It is arguably the coolest religious title in human history. From that day forward, cannabis became sacred in India, not as a secret indulgence, but as a sacrament. The priests called it a gift from the gods. The yogis used it to deepen their meditation. The common people drank it during festivals to feel closer to the divine. And all of them believed that the plant opened a door between the human world and the heavenly one. They called it bhang, a smooth, milky drink laced with crushed leaves and spices that tasted like heaven and hit like a prayer. Imagine the great festivals of India, the nights of chanting and dancing, the temple bells ringing, the fires blazing, and thousands of voices rising in praise of the gods. And in the middle of all that devotion, someone hands you a cup of bhang. You drink it, your shoulders drop, your mind opens, and suddenly the gods do not seem so far away. But the Indians were not naive. They knew that bhang did more than bring you closer to the divine. It made you feel good. It made you forget the heat, the hunger, the weight of a life that was often short and brutal. It made the long hours of work feel shorter. It made the endless cycle of harvest and monsoon and harvest feel less like a trap. They did not pretend it was just for priests. They knew it was for everyone, and they embraced it with a joy that the Chinese would have found unseemly and the Scythians would have found perfectly natural. In India, cannabis was not a rebellion against the gods. It was a gift from the gods, a little bit of relief in a world that offered very little. And yet there's a deeper layer to this story. The Indians did not just drink bhang for the pleasure of it. They drank it to understand. They believed that the plant could peel back the veil of illusion that separates us from the truth. It could show you the universe as it really is. It could make you feel the interconnectedness of all things. It could help you laugh at your own suffering and see it for what it is. A passing cloud, a dream, a story you tell yourself. In India, cannabis was not about escaping reality. It was about embracing it, at least the parts that felt good. For the Indians, the plant was a companion on the path to enlightenment. And sometimes that path felt a lot like dancing. And speaking of paths, the plant was about to hit the road. The greatest road the world had ever seen. And now the plant began its greatest journey, not as a seed carried by a bird or a root floating down a river, but as cargo, precious cargo wrapped in cloth and traded for gold and silk and spices. The road was called the Silk Road, but it could have been called the Cannabis Highway, because the plant traveled those dusty trails with the same persistence as the merchants who carried it, across the deserts of Central Asia, over the mountains of Persia, down into the markets of the Middle East and the ports of the Mediterranean. And everywhere it went, it left a trail of curiosity, wonder, and a faint herbal scent that lingered in the air long after the caravans had passed. Imagine the scene for a moment. A long line of camels and horses, their bells chiming softly in the dry wind. The merchants are tired, their faces worn by sun and sand. They carry silks from China, spices from India, and gold from the Western empires. But tucked quietly in their packs, labeled as medicine or incense, is a treasure that weighs almost nothing and is worth more than silver. Cannabis. They do not speak of it openly because every empire on the road has its own rules, its own priests, its own opinions. But they know its value, and they know that somewhere down the road, someone is waiting for it. As the plant moved west, its shape shifted. In Persia, it became the smoke of philosophers, the companion of mystics who sat in gardens and debated the nature of existence. In Egypt, it became an ointment for the eyes of pharaohs and a balm for the aching feet of slaves. In Greece, it became a subject of intellectual curiosity, discussed by doctors who marveled at its ability to soothe pain and by poets who admired its ability to inspire strange dreams. And in the markets of Damascus and Baghdad, it became hashish, a portable, potent, and infinitely more convenient version of the green gift. You could roll it into a ball, store in a pouch, and carry it across the desert without worrying about leaves crumbling or seeds spilling. The age of portable enlightenment had arrived. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. The more the plant spread, the more it frightened those who held power. The priests of the desert religions were suspicious of anything that could open the mind without their permission. The kings were nervous about anything that made their subjects feel too relaxed, too content, too willing to question authority. And the scholars who had once debated the plant's virtues began to whisper about its dangers. It was not the plant that had changed. It was the world around it. The world that had grown more rigid, more controlled, more afraid of the very freedom that cannabis seemed to offer. And so a pattern emerged that would repeat itself for the next 1,000 years. The plant would be celebrated in secret and condemned in public. It would be used by mystics and condemned by priests. It would be passed around at festivals and banned by politicians. The same green leaves that had once been a gift from the gods were now a threat to the state. And as the plant continued its westward march, it picked up a reputation that would follow it into the modern world. A reputation born not from what it did, but from what it represented. The freedom to step outside yourself. The freedom to think differently. The freedom to feel good without asking for permission. And that perhaps is the most dangerous thing of all. But the plant was not done with its journey yet. It was about to enter a land where it would become a legend. And a legend would become a word you still use today. And so the plant arrived at the fortress of Alamut, a mountain stronghold so remote and so forbidding that even the eagles seemed to give it a wide berth. Here in the 11th century, a man named Hashashin ruled a secretive sect that would become the stuff of legend. They were called the Nizari Ismailis, but their enemies had another name for them, the Hashashin. And the story of how that name became a word you use every single day is one of history's most delicious ironies, because it is almost certainly not true. The legend goes like this. Hassanai Sabah was a master of psychological warfare. He knew that his followers needed to be fearless to carry out his orders. And so, according to the chroniclers of the time, he would give them hashish. He would let them experience a taste of paradise. And then he would tell them that they could have that paradise forever if they completed their missions. The myth grew like wildfire. European knights returning from the Crusades spread tales of Eastern assassins who were intoxicated by strange herbs. The chroniclers wrote with a mixture of horror and fascination about these shadowy figures who moved with unnatural calm and struck without warning. They said the hashish made them fearless. They said it made them devoted. They said it made them very, very stabby. But here is the truth that the chroniclers conveniently ignored. There is no evidence that the Nizari Ismailis ever used hashish before their missions. Not a single contemporary account from their own libraries. Not a single archaeological trace. The entire story was probably invented by their enemies who needed a good excuse for why an elite team of mountain zealots kept outsmarting entire empires. It was easier to say they were high than to admit that the other side had better training and better strategy. The rumor became the default explanation for a generation of political failures. And it stuck. Now, let us pause and appreciate the genius of this slander. The word Hashashin mutated through languages until it became assassin, a word that conjures images of stealth and danger and cold-blooded efficiency. And it all traces back to a plant that had absolutely nothing to do with most assassinations. Cannabis became the scapegoat for a myth that was too good to fact-check. The irony is staggering. The same plant that had been worshipped as a gift from the gods was now linked to shadowy violence. The same plant that had been a sacrament and a medicine was now a symbol of secret societies and political murder. It was the medieval version of a smear campaign, and it worked brilliantly. The Nizari Ismailis were actually scholars and engineers and diplomats. They built libraries. They negotiated treaties. They only killed people when absolutely necessary, which admittedly was still quite often. The idea that they got high before missions probably came from the same chroniclers who believed that dragons lived in Ethiopia. But the damage was done. Hashish was forever linked with the word assassin, and cannabis gained a new reputation. From sacred plant to suspicious substance, from the companion of gods to the tool of killers. And humanity, as usual, learned absolutely nothing from it. The plant survived the slander the way it survived everything else. Quietly, stubbornly, patiently, waiting for the next civilization to take credit for discovering it all over again. And by the time the dust settled, the green flame had spread across the entire known world. And the debate was just beginning.